Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Gregg Katz. I am the Chief Strategy Officer for TSCG, formerly the Shopping Center Group, and TSCG Analytics. Want to talk to you a little bit today about location from a retail perspective, and how we are starting, or how we have been looking at location and what that means as far as kind of what's happening in the data world and how that affects the analysis and what we do. So over the last couple of years, we've seen 10 data challenges come into play as we're dealing with location. The first is we are definitely seeing data provider confusion out there, and that is that's become prevalent from the standpoint of what the offerings are, how they interact with each other, and in a lot of respects, just how to correctly analyze those data sets and how they can benefit the location analysis and what happens with that. The second challenge is that we're seeing this misconception that one data set is the holy grail, and most in particular, that seems these days to be focused around mobile location data, and that all you need to do is print out a mobile location data report, and it kind of answers all of those mysterious questions related to location and the consumer and how the consumer is moving around and in that location, which, as we'll get into, that is not necessarily the case at all. And kind of going right off of that mobile location data is still the data fad, meaning the other concern related to this data is that people are acquiring this data because they feel like they need to, not because it's answering the questions for them, and not because it's answering the questions for them and in any way, shape, or form going to be used as it should be used. It's more, I got to have it because everybody else has it. From a data veracity standpoint, I think that just that whole concept of data veracity is somewhat self-explanatory in terms of what that looks like. What does, how are you analyzing that as a company, the quality of the data, and how you're using it, how it was collected, and asking the right questions around that, making sure that it makes sense and that it's answering your use case questions from a location perspective. The other piece is that psychographics are becoming stale, and by that we mean that in a lot of respects, psychographics aren't giving us a complete picture of consumer personality as it impacts location. The next point would be the combination of art and science, and that really the data is part of the equation, and looking at the data as it pertains to location is just that. It's the science of it, but there is an art to it. The data, we refer to the data as either a photograph or a movie, right? And so that photograph is of a specific period in time and tells you what's happening, and the movie can be a series of time that leads all the way up to today. Now, obviously, there can be data forecasting and predictive modeling, but from an art and science perspective, there's a lot of things that science won't pick up on, that whether it's location characteristics, whether it's construction projects happening, demographics on the ground starting to change and evolve, trade areas shifting, a lot of that's seen on the ground before it's seen in the data. So making sure those are combined is key. The same store sales metrics, as you look to understand location and sales, the evolving same store sales metrics has become a hot topic, specifically relating to e-commerce, brick and mortar, and omni-channel, and how you should look at sales and where those sales are coming from. It's no longer about is this a brick and mortar location? It's how that location is serving the brand and the consumer holistically. The other is making sure that the data and the location data is answering those use case specific questions, kind of going back to not having it just to have it. Data privacy, we all have probably seen iOS and Apple software and what's happening from a data privacy and tracking perspective. Google looks like it plans to follow suit with Android in 2022. And what does that do to what does that do from a data sampling size and impact on what demographics are utilizing the data, and are we getting a sample set from a well-rounded demographic, or are we, now as the data shifting, is it starting to exclude certain demographics more than others, and those types of scenarios. So the data privacy, as it continues to evolve, especially in the US, is of significant concern, and especially coming out of COVID. We've already got the issue of how do you account for the anomaly of COVID and what it did to retail and the analysis of the consumer. Then you add the privacy and some of the sample size decreases, et cetera, and that adds to it. Then the last piece of the puzzle is education, and this is going around making sure that the data providers are partners and providing that data to you in an educational scenario and working with you to talk about its limitations and not just selling for the sake of selling subscriptions. So on that note, here are mobile location data rankings or visitation rankings for the Home Depot locations. This is a sample of those Home Depot locations, and the other one on the right-hand side is based on a center that is Annapolis Plaza, based in Maryland. And the question is, what does it mean? And one of the hardest things we've seen with visitation data is telling people that, in all honesty, this doesn't mean a whole lot. And this has been a controversial topic, and I've been pretty vocal about this, but we've done study after study of trying to correlate visitation with sales or performance, and we have not been able to do that. Give you an example, we looked at Costco locations in the state of Georgia. We looked at Best Buy locations in the state of, in the Central Florida area, and the highest volume or the highest sales Costco was the second lowest in visitation. And so that's what we kept seeing over and over again, that one doesn't equate to the other. And why is that? I think most of you probably understand very quickly when you're looking at these numbers tell you visits. They may translate to opportunities, but they don't translate into, is anybody buying? Malls today are a great example of that. As you walk around malls, it's not how many people are in there. You start to have to look at how many people are actually walking with bags, right? And what's happening there. So, just because the Home Depot has the most visits doesn't mean it's the best Home Depot. Just because the center has in this case, the 6th highest visits in the area does not mean it's the 6th best performing location. And I think that what's happening from a real estate perspective is a lot of the real estate industry has started focusing on these numbers because they're easy to focus on, especially the way some of the data providers are spitting them out. And it doesn't create the context that we need to look at these numbers in. So when we look at trade area, we are no longer, pretty much holistically across our analysis, we're no longer looking, other than initial quick analysis, we're no longer looking at radius rings and drive times for trade areas. And the reason behind that has been both of those assume that, and when we get information on those, they assume that we are aggregating and that everyone in that 5-mile radius ring or everyone in that 10-minute drive time is a customer. So when you show demographics on from a retailer perspective or on a flyer for a property, et cetera, you're giving the assumption that everybody in that 5 miles is a shopper of that location or shopper of that retailer, and that's simply not the case. The one thing mobile location data has really done well is allowed us to create a data-derived trade area. And without getting into all of the nitty-gritty and the specifics, it allows us to look at where consumers are coming from, what their path to purchase is, where they live, where they work, and really start creating a truer trade area. And the way we've been talking about this to our clients is, imagine a 100-piece puzzle. And that 100-piece puzzle would be the equivalent of a 5-mile radius ring. Instead of using that 100-piece puzzle and creating all of the data and information off of that, running the analysis off of that 100-piece puzzle, we're pulling out the pieces of the puzzle that are pertinent of where consumers are coming from, what their path to purchase is, and then we're able to get better demographic information, better psychographic information, and better even better geosocial or social media information. So it's a different way of exploring trade area. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. Is it significantly more accurate as to what's happening with a retailer, a location, or center? Most definitely. And it allows us to really create insights that focus on those core areas of visitation. So now going forward, when we present to a client, when we present the trade area, we are using that mobile location data, and we are using that information to allow us to generate the demographics, the psychographics, and all of the pertinent information off of that. So now we're talking, when we talk about a average household income of $81,000, we're talking about from actual visitation, not just from the trade area, not from the immediate area. So we've seen variations, significant variations of 20, 25, 30% between the old traditional trade areas of radius rings and drive times and the actual visitation trade areas. So it's been really interesting to watch that analysis over time. As we start to look at location and what it means, we're starting to look foundationally and taking the same approach out of center as in center to understand what's happening from an in center perspective on visitation. And again, we're not looking at this holistically to say, because home goods is only showing 8% of in-center activity, that it's performing well or otherwise. We're trying to understand consumer patterns, consumer behaviors, so that we can better optimize the location, the shopping center, and we can better tenant it based on who's coming into the center, what their profile looks like. And we're trying to understand what kind of cross-shopping is happening so that we, again, can make sure that we're putting the right tenants in the right position for success and for the and for the long-term value of the property. Everything we are doing is looking at this from an indexed perspective as well. And so when we start looking at competitive scenarios, in this case, this is looking at Annapolis Plaza and understanding what other centers are getting the same traffic that Annapolis is getting, or the same visitor. I apologize, the same visitor that Annapolis is getting. And in doing that, we can start understanding, again, what needs is Annapolis Plaza not filling? Why are customers going to other locations? Is this something that we can, in this center, help to increase dwell time and have people stay longer and shop different places by, again, continuing to re-tenant towards better meeting the needs of the customer. So it allows us, again, to look at different ways to understand what's happening. And all of this starts to come into play as we look at things like dwell time. I mean, this is an example of understanding not only competitively what's going on, but we noticed that this center had a extremely different dwell time than a lot of its competitors. And then we've started looking at the obvious reasons. There was a couple that had movie theaters, which obviously is going to increase dwell time. But we started noticing a significant difference in the restaurants and what the restaurants were doing to dwell time, and the need for potentially the need for more restaurants in Annapolis Plaza to increase dwell time and to give other opportunities to those existing tenants in the area. So again, it's starting to look at the data a little bit deeper, answer specific questions on what's happening, why it's happening, and how we can better improve the overall situation. We can also look at something called brand affinity. And brand affinity is understanding, again, where customers are going before and after they're visiting a location or a brand. So in this case, 35% of the customers that visited our location visited a Nordstrom within 2 hours before or 2 hours after. And so as you go to start looking at what you need to do, how you need to do it, how are you trending with certain retailers, and should you therefore make location decisions based on some of these other retailers that you have strong brand affinity with, become interesting discussions as you look at what makes a location work and what makes a location not work. Even from a location perspective of looking at similar markets, if you know you have successful locations in one market, it's no longer enough to just look at, again, straight demographics or straight psychographics. It's taking a holistic approach and looking at similar markets across either a market or across a state, across the region, even the country, and to start looking at, if I have the right consumers in the area and they're moving around in that area, then that location should perform like one of my better locations. One of the other pieces that we are using is geosocial or social media data. And the difference with this is it gives us a narrower focus on the psychographic segmentation, but does so through what they're posting from a social media perspective and what they're posting in the area of the location. And this is not any longer about, their census-based data and the demographic and psychographics that exist through that census data. So now we're starting to see what customers that are in the area are posting about, what their likes and dislikes are, what their interests are, and can start compiling what we are calling micro segmentation to really start understanding who's there and what they're looking for. And that can then turn into those affinities of, if wine lovers are scoring very high in the area, then that lends itself to, does the area need more, wine stores or wine bars or restaurants that have strong wine menus or that have strong socialization, in terms of in their layout, et cetera. So it allows you to start targeting tenants that best match and fit what's happening in the area already. So final piece is that this is all evolving and has become significantly different especially now that COVID has accelerated e-commerce. And that is, it's no longer about brick and mortar or e-commerce or brick and mortar and e-commerce. It's about understanding the holistic approach to location. So from a TSCG standpoint, we're not just going to look at mobile location data. We're not going to just look at demographic or psychographic. We're going to look at, all of these intertwined with each other to give us a perspective on what's happening holistically from a location or brand perspective. So this map here is looking at Home Depot in the state of Georgia. And what it's looking at is those orange dots are all the Home Depot locations. And what we've done is we've taken and put purchasing data on top of this, both from an online and in-store perspective, to give us an idea of where they're strong online, where they're strong online and in-store, and where they're strong in-store but not online. And we can start looking at, from a purchasing pattern perspective, where are the gaps? Then we can start overlaying the mobile location data and the geosocial data and the psychographic and demographic data, so that when we're looking for location for someone like Home Depot, we can start looking at what needs to happen here. Why do we need to fill a gap here? Is it to address, high online with no store presence? Is it a pure branding scenario? Is it a marketing scenario? Is it to fill better from micro fulfillment perspective? And so all of these things are starting to come together. So location is no longer about pure brick and mortar. It's about understanding what the new purpose of location is. And that new purpose is 100% now creating something that can support online, support in-store, and go that direction. So looks like there's a question here. Thank you, Olivia. It says, are you finding greater cross-shopping? Are you finding greater cross-shopping to be greater at centers with food or pharmacy? We are finding a difference in trade area for those. Cross-shopping, it depends. So trade area, grocery has a very narrow trade area typically. They're clustered, they're more neighborhood oriented. So that trade area is tight and more condensed. And so we're seeing that, and pharmacy tends to be similar in that regards. But the cross-shopping piece, it depends on the grocer. And if it is Trader Joe's, Whole Foods, things like that have a further reach. People come from further and the trade areas are expanded. And I think you'll see that if there is cross-shopping, it's going to be that the grocer is going to be last because people have perishables that they're not going to leave in their car while they're cross-shopping. And we see that a lot as well. So like in the example I showed, there was a strong correlation between Marshalls and Trader Joe's, but they were going to Marshalls first for those same reasons. Next question, how do you know if a person is a customer or not to generate this catchment area? Could they be confused with people who are visiting the site rather than shopping? They absolutely can be confused. That again is one of the, it's different per segment. So restaurants as an example, restaurants, if they're in the restaurant, that in most every case, they are consuming something, alcohol, food, drink, etc. But you don't know. When we consider them visitors, we consider them as opportunities, not as customers of any particular location. So if they go into a Marshalls, it's an opportunity for Marshalls. And so what the missing piece to this, to do that in-depth analysis, is going to be the customer provided sales in some way, shape, or form. So we can differentiate, and again, not 100%, but we can differentiate between employees and visitors based on a lot of watching the frequency and seeing how many times the same device is showing up over and over again. And somebody showing up 25 days out of 30, you kind of are going to go with the assumption that they work there. But at the same time, that's why those numbers I showed earlier are very misleading. 2 million visitors at one center or at one location, 1 million at another, does not mean 2 million is a better scenario, because I'd rather have 1 million visitors where all 1 million are buying something versus 2 million visitors where 500,000 of them are buying something. So again, you've picked up on one of the weaknesses or one of the misconceptions, especially of the mobile location data. The other question that showed up is, what is the data source for movements? Do you also use CRM data? Data sources, we use mobile location data aggregators. Those come from app-based GPS pings. And so that ping is based on the app, and the apps have different frequencies of pings. So you're getting an aggregated data set that usually has a margin of error of somewhere around 2 or 3%. If done correctly and the sample size is large enough. We don't use CRM data, but what we do use in a lot of cases is customer data, whether that's transaction-based data, credit card data, or frequency program data, those types of things to help us refine the analysis. So that looks like it's all the questions. I appreciate the time today, and feel free to shoot us a note if you have any further questions. And again, I hope everyone has a great day and a great week. Thank you very much.